Well, what's up, everybody? Thanks for checking into my YouTube channel. Hey, I've got a question for you. It might strike you as a little bit odd. Have you ever met your pastor before? I know for many of you the answer to that question is rhetorical, but I'm sure there's just as many of you who would say no as perhaps would say, well, of course I have, to that question. Well, hey, I'm Matt. I'm the pastor of Gospel Fellowship PCA, a Presbyterian church just north of Pittsburgh. If you're looking for a church and you happen to be in our area, come check us out, Gospel Fellowship PCA. Let's dig into this. Have you ever met your pastor before? Kind of a serious question, as a matter of fact. I was talking to one lady a while back, not at this church, but at a previous church, and I noticed that she began to act just a little bit skittish around me, a little bit strange, a little bit awkward. You know how people get a little bit weird sometimes. We ministers were kind of used to that, I guess, because we're weirdos anyways. But then I asked her, is everything okay? And this was the first time I ever heard this, but she said, yeah, I'm just kind of nervous around you because I've never met my pastor before. I was thinking, like, what in the world is going on here? Turns out she was a member of one of those mega churches where you never meet your pastor. And they had apparently just moved or relocated to our area, joined our church. There was no mega church in our area, so they joined us. And I think it was like a new members class or something like that. She told me she'd never met her pastor before. Her church was so big that she'd never actually met the guy. Apparently it was one of these satellite situations where you don't actually meet your pastor. You have like a campus pastor and then the preaching dude that's on the TV all the time. You don't actually know him. He's just out there going to conferences and writing books, and you put him on the big screen. He's not even physically present when you have church. And so for her to actually meet her pastor, that was quite quite a surprise. And it was a surprise for me too, because I never heard anybody say that. And then I realized how many of these mega churches are there in these satellite campuses where people have virtually no working relationship, no interpersonal relationship with their pastor himself. They probably know all about him because the pastor probably uses all kinds of personal illustrations about, his children and this and that in his sermons. And people probably know way more about that kind of a pastor than he knows about them. But therein lies the problem. And when I realized how nervous I made her just in being physically present, aside from the fact that I'm an awkward person anyways, I realized, I think this is actually kind of evidence of further evidence, I should say, of what I have identified as a problem with a celebrity culture within Christianity. In fact, one of the books that I wrote actually addresses this topic a number of times. It's called Unknown: The Extraordinary Influence of Ordinary Christians. I'll post a link to that if you're interested in the description of this video. But what I do think I've identified in that book, I'd like to kind of, comment on a little bit here in this video, that the celebrity of cultural celebrity Christianity, the culture of celebrity Christianity, I should say, really is a problem in the church for a number of reasons that I kind of want to get into here just for a moment. Now, before I go any further, I do want to say that I'm not knocking on big churches. In fact, I do think big churches have a wonderful and beautiful role in the body of Christ. I myself was a part of a very big church in Akron, the Chapel, for a number of years, where I was discipled, experienced a call to ministry, had some great pastors, all of which I knew, or at least most of which I knew. Our senior pastor was a guy in those days called Newt Larson, and this is when the chapel was thriving, 10,000 plus people. But Newt Larson, just as part of his deal, is he would have everybody over to his house as they went through the new membership program. And once he had you to his house, he would remember your name forever. I don't know how he did it. He knew thousands of names, and he could see you in the hallway, and he could call you by name. So I certainly have no major beef with churches just because they're large. But I do think that if you don't have a relationship with your pastor, then that probably is a bit of a problem for, well, let's tick off a couple of reasons. First of all, pastors will sometimes remove themselves from accountability because nobody in the congregation actually really knows who they are. Now, they probably have some sort of inner circle of leadership that knows them, but most of the people really don't know who they are. And actually, when you think about it, if you think of the number of pastors that have fallen big time in recent years, it's probably because they've set themselves up in such situations where there is nobody who's really truly accountable to them, except for that small inner circle of board members or whatever it is, maybe a few key staff people or assistants of assistants and things like that. But this is why these people often grow so arrogant and prideful, because they have very few people that can actually check them, check their character, call them into account. And unfortunately, this just grinds against the gears of what the Bible gives us as a definition of pastoral qualification. So let me just read this to you. This is from the letter of 1 Timothy. It says, "This saying is trustworthy. If anyone aspires to the office of overseer or pastor, he aspires, he desires a noble task. Therefore, an overseer must be above reproach, the husband of one wife, sober-minded, controlled, respectable, hospitable, able to teach, not a drunkard, not violent, but gentle, not quarrelsome, not a lover of money," etc., and so forth. And one of the things that you notice about all of those qualifications is not only is there the ability to teach, but most of those qualifications would be rightly and duly discerned only in the context of real personal relationship, one to the other. Now, I don't know if you can hear, but in the hallway out there, my associate pastor, he's been making phone calls pretty much all afternoon, just calling the people of our church, checking up on them. And that really is the essence of pastoral ministry, because to be a pastor is more than just to preach the word, but to actually tend the flock, to care for the flock, to pray for the flock. And how else would you be even able to do that unless you, of course, knew the flock and the flock knew you? So you have sort of this mutual two-way street of relationships that are the expected norm of pastoral relationships within the New Testament. Again, I'm not knocking on big churches, because one of the things that I've observed in my own life is the pastor is simply not able to spend equal amounts of time with every single person in the congregation. And that's true whether your church is large or medium or small. In any pastoral context, even if your church is just 30 people, there are going to be certain people that the pastor necessarily spends more time with, just in the very discharging of the duties. So for instance, a pastor is probably going to spend more time with his staff or his elders or his deacons than any other people in the church. He's probably going to spend more time with men in general than he spends with women in general. And if that's not true, there's probably something a little bit weird about that. And so it's not exactly fair for every single person in the congregation to demand to be best friends with the pastor, because the pastor, by definition, is caring for a wide array of people, even if that wide array is comparatively small. Let's say 25 to 50 people. That's still a lot of people for the pastor to invest in. And so it is unrealistic to expect the pastor to spread his time across the whole body of the congregation fairly. But then again, a pastor should at least know his people. He should know their names. He should know their faces. He should know many of their prayer requests. If a pastor meets somebody in the hallway, he should be able to identify a few things about that person to pray for or to discuss. And so while he's not best friends with everybody in the church, he should at least know his people well enough to ask follow-up questions about their lives and how it is they're doing. That's just baseline pastoral ministry taking place in the context of real relationships. One of my convictions is that a church shouldn't grow beyond its ability to care for its members. Let me just say that again. A church probably shouldn't grow beyond its ability to take care of its members. Now, that doesn't mean that the pastor is the only one doing the caretaking. That's why we have elders. That's why the church has deacons. Read Acts chapter 6. And so the whole burden of pastoral ministry doesn't fall on the head of the pastor alone. But as a general rule, if a church is growing so large that it actually can't care for its members, then it probably has grown too large. It either needs to re-envision its way of doing pastoral care, or perhaps it needs to consider planting another church or splitting into two healthy congregations or something like that. But I am afraid that along with the problem of celebrity Christianity, we also have the problem of anonymous Christianity as well. And that's where people simply don't know anyone in the church. And I am afraid that that's probably true for a good many of my viewers, perhaps even, that people that don't know many people, if at all, any in their own congregation. They simply slip in, they worship, and then they simply slip out, and they are virtually unknown. I think a good general rule in most contexts is that a pastor should have coffee with everybody in his congregation at least once a year. He should be making efforts to do that kind of an outreach. Hopefully he has the time to do that. If he's so busy that he can't, I think that's going to be a problem. At least once a year. That'd be baseline minimum. Hopefully there are many people in the church that the pastor is hanging out with on a regular basis, people in a fellowship group or a men's group or a discipleship group, of course investing time in the staff and the elders. But everybody should at least take the initiative to try to get together with their pastor at least once a year, at the very least. And then finally, I just need to say this. I just feel burdened to say so. I know I've got 10,000, almost 11,000 subscribers to this channel now. I certainly wouldn't want you to ever think that I'm your pastor if we haven't met. The truth of the matter is, as much as you maybe appreciate my videos, and I certainly appreciate you watching and sharing and all that, I'm not your pastor, and I can't care for you because you're on the other side of the internet. And unfortunately, I don't know the first thing about many of you, and so I would urge you to please join a local congregation, love your pastor, know your pastor, start off by meeting your pastor, and I think that's going to be for the good of all involved. All right, well, thanks for checking into my YouTube channel. By the way, we'll post a link to this short little book that I wrote, Unknown: The Extraordinary Influence of Ordinary Christians. We talk about celebrity Christianity and the amazing impact that people that are not famous can have on the world. All right, so love you lots. Thanks for checking in, and we'll talk to you later.